The dark psychology behind Hitler's control, how he manipulated millions. In 1933, Adolf Hitler had no real army, no money, and almost no political power. 10 years later, he controlled an entire continent and convinced millions of ordinary people to commit history's greatest atrocity. This is not a story about a monster, it's a story about psychology, and it's one of the most important stories you'll ever hear. Because what Hitler understood, better than almost anyone before him, was the human mind. How it works, how it breaks, and how it can be turned against itself. The techniques he used didn't die in 1945. They're still being used today by politicians, by advertisers, and by social media algorithms. Knowing them is your best defense. To understand Hitler's psychology, you have to start where all psychology starts. Childhood. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889 in Braunau am Inn, Austria. His father, Alois, was a strict and often violent customs official. His mother, Clara, was devoted, almost worshipping, of her son. Psychologists who have studied Hitler's early life point to a classic pattern: an authoritarian, abusive father, an overprotective, loving mother, a child who learned early that the world is divided into the powerful and the powerless, and he was determined never to be powerless again. By his teenage years, Hitler had developed what psychologists today would recognize as a fragile, narcissistic personality, a desperate need for admiration, an inability to accept failure or criticism, and a tendency to blame others for his own shortcomings. When the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts rejected his application twice, he didn't question his talent. He blamed the Jewish professors he believed had rejected him. The seed of his ideology and his method of control was planted. So, how exactly did one man manipulate an entire nation? Psychologists have identified 5 core techniques Hitler used, and each one exploits a real weakness in human psychology. Every manipulator needs the same thing: a villain. Hitler chose the Jewish population of Germany, a group that made up less than 1% of the population, but in a country humiliated by World War I, crushed by economic depression, and desperate for an explanation, the lie found fertile ground. This is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. When people are anxious, afraid, or uncertain, they become more susceptible to simple explanations. Psychologists call it the scapegoat mechanism, the human tendency to displace anger and fear onto a visible, identifiable group. Hitler didn't invent anti-Semitism, he simply weaponized it. In 1977, psychologists discovered something disturbing. The more times you hear a statement, regardless of whether it's true, the more likely you are to believe it. They called it the illusory truth effect. Hitler and his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, understood this instinctively, decades before the research confirmed it. The same messages were repeated across every medium: radio, newspapers, posters, speeches, schools, until they stopped feeling like claims and started feeling like facts. Repeat a lie often enough and it becomes the truth. Not because people are stupid, because that's how human memory works. The Nuremberg rallies were not political events, they were psychological performances. Hundreds of thousands of people moving in perfect synchrony. The Albert Speer-designed Cathedral of Light, 152 anti-aircraft searchlights shooting beams into the night sky. The thundering music, the rhythmic chanting. Psychologist Robert Cialdini calls this social proof. When we see enormous numbers of people doing something, our brain interprets it as evidence that it must be right. We are herd animals, wired to conform. But there was something deeper happening at Nuremberg. When you stand in a crowd that large, you stop thinking as an individual. You merge into something bigger. Psychologists call it de-individuation, the temporary loss of your sense of self in a group. And a person who has lost their sense of self is a person who will do things they never would do alone. Hitler didn't present himself as a politician. He presented himself as a savior. This was entirely deliberate. His propaganda created what psychologists call a parasocial relationship, a one-sided emotional bond where millions of people felt a deep personal connection to someone they had never met. They wrote him love letters. They named their children after him. They wept when they saw him. This wasn't coincidence. It was engineering. Hitler controlled his image obsessively. Every photograph was approved, every speech rehearsed, every public appearance staged. He was selling not a political program, but an identity. The strong father Germany never had. And when people invest their identity in a leader, they will defend that leader against any evidence, because to admit the leader is wrong is to admit they themselves were fooled. Hitler governed by permanent crisis. There was always an enemy at the gates, always a threat that required immediate, unconditional action, always a reason why normal laws and normal morality had to be suspended, just this once, just for now, just until the danger passed. Psychologists know that under genuine or perceived threat, human decision-making changes dramatically. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thought, becomes less active. The amygdala, the fear center, takes over. People in fear don't analyze, they follow. Hitler kept Germany in a permanent state of managed fear and used that fear to justify every expansion of his power. But here's the tragic irony of Hitler's psychology. The same patterns that gave him power eventually destroyed him. By 1944, the narcissistic personality that had made him a compelling leader had collapsed into something far more dangerous. He could no longer accept bad news. Generals who reported defeats were fired or executed. Reports were falsified to tell him what he wanted to hear. He began to lose contact with reality entirely. In the final months of the war, from his bunker beneath Berlin, Hitler issued orders to armies that no longer existed. He moved divisions on maps that had been destroyed weeks earlier. He planned counter-offensives with soldiers who were dead. His inner circle watched helplessly as the man who had so masterfully exploited human psychology became its ultimate victim, trapped inside a mind that could no longer distinguish between fantasy and reality. On April 30th, 1945, the greatest manipulator in modern history died by his own hand in a bunker as the world he had tried to conquer closed in around him. So, what do we take from this? Hitler's story is not just history. Every technique he used, the common enemy, the repeated lie, the manufactured spectacle, the cult of personality, the permanent crisis, these are not relics of the 1930s. They are features of the modern information environment. Knowing them doesn't make you immune, but it makes you harder to fool. And in a world that runs on manufactured emotion and algorithmic outrage, that awareness might be the most important thing you can have. Next video, Joseph Stalin used completely different psychological tactics to control the Soviet Union, and in many ways, they were even more effective. He didn't want to be loved, he wanted to be feared, and the difference tells you everything about two very different kinds of power. Subscribe so you don't miss it.